All right, be honest with me. Have you ever walked into a room and immediately felt something was off? Maybe the air felt heavy, or there was a strange tension you couldn't quite explain. Something deep inside of you was warning you to stay alert. Or maybe you've met someone and you knew you couldn't trust them before they even spoke. That's not just intuition, that's discernment. A gift from God that allows you to see beyond the surface. Today we're going to break down 7 powerful signs that show you have this incredible gift. If even one of these resonates with you, then pay attention, because God might be calling you to something bigger than you realize. Listen, discernment isn't just about having good instincts. It's not some natural ability or a lucky guess. It's deeper than that. It's a divine gift that allows you to separate truth from lies, good from evil, and God's plan from deception. Think about Jesus. He saw straight through the Pharisees' hypocrisy when others couldn't. That is discernment. It helps you navigate a world where not everything is as it seems. If you have this gift, it is not by accident. God has a purpose for it, and today we are going to explore 7 clear signs that might show you have it. Pay close attention, because this could be the confirmation you have been waiting for. Let's be real. The world today is full of deception. Lies are everywhere, hidden behind smooth words, fake smiles, and false promises. People are misled, distracted, and confused. But God does not leave His people blind. He gives discernment to those who are willing to see. Think about Jesus. He wasn't fooled by appearances. When the Pharisees tried to trap Him with tricky words, He saw straight through their hypocrisy. He called them out, saying, "You clean the outside of the cup, but inside you are full of greed and wickedness." That is what discernment does. It helps you see beyond the surface. But here's the thing. This gift isn't just about knowing the truth. It's about responsibility. If God has given you discernment, He expects you to use it. To protect yourself, to protect others, to lead people toward truth. So the question is, do you have this gift? And if you do, are you ready to use it? Let's talk about desire. Not just any desire, the kind that burns deep inside you, the kind you can't shake no matter how much you try, the kind that pulls you toward something greater, something beyond what you can fully understand. That is the kind of desire we are talking about when it comes to discernment. It's not a passing thought. It's not a casual curiosity. It is a hunger, a longing, a deep craving to know the truth, to understand what is real, to separate what is from God and what is not. And here's the thing. You don't just wake up one day and decide you want it. No, this kind of desire is placed inside you by God Himself. Think about it. Why are you even here listening to this? Why are you drawn to topics like this when other people couldn't care less? Because there is something inside of you that wants more clarity, more wisdom, more truth. That is not an accident. The Bible talks about this. In 1 Corinthians, Paul tells us, eagerly desire the gifts of the Spirit, especially prophecy. The word eagerly means more than just wanting something. It means pursuing it, chasing after it, being relentless in seeking it. That is the kind of desire we are talking about. Look at Solomon. He could have asked God for anything: power, wealth, victory over his enemies. But what did he ask for? Wisdom. He wanted to understand things the way God does. And because he asked, God not only gave him wisdom, but also everything else he didn't even ask for. That's how important this gift is. Now let's make this real. Have you ever had a moment where you just felt this deep, undeniable pull to seek wisdom? Maybe you started reading the Bible more, not because someone told you to, but because you genuinely wanted to. Maybe you started questioning things, not in a rebellious way, but because you wanted to understand the deeper meaning behind them. Maybe you have always been the person in your friend group or family who sees things before others do, who picks up on things no one else notices. That is a sign. And let's not forget Jesus. He constantly told people to seek and you will find, knock and the door will be open to you. That means discernment isn't just handed out randomly. It is given to those who truly desire it, who ask for it, who pursue it. So if you have that desire, do not ignore it. Lean into it. God is trying to show you something. Some of you might be thinking, well, I do feel this way, but maybe it's just me. Maybe I'm just overthinking things. Let me tell you, if you weren't meant to have discernment, you wouldn't even care about this right now. The fact that you do means something. It means God is calling you to step into this gift and develop it. So what do you do with this? Simple. Ask. Just like Solomon, pray for it. Seek it out. Study the Word. Surround yourself with people who value wisdom. Because when you desire discernment, you are desiring something straight from the heart of God. And trust me, He will honor that desire. The question is, are you ready for it? Because this is not just about knowing more. It's about responsibility. It's about seeing things differently, carrying a weight that not everyone understands. But if God has placed this desire inside of you, He will also give you the strength to handle it. So do not be afraid. Step into it, own it, and watch how He moves in your life. Let's talk about what happens when you have this deep desire for discernment. Because once it's there, once God plants that hunger inside of you, it changes you. It shifts the way you see the world. Things that once seemed normal no longer feel the same. The entertainment you used to enjoy might start feeling empty. The conversations you once had may start to seem shallow. Even the people you surround yourself with, some of them may not understand this pull you feel toward wisdom and truth. And that can be hard. But here's the thing. This isn't a bad thing. It's a sign that you are growing. It's a sign that God is calling you to a higher level of understanding. Think about Jesus. He was constantly seeing things others couldn't. He saw people's real intentions, their real motives, and because of that, He carried a different weight. He wasn't fooled by empty words or false promises. He walked in truth. That's what discernment does. It refines you. It pulls you closer to God and farther away from the distractions of the world. And that might make you feel different, maybe even a little isolated at times. But don't let that discourage you. It means you are exactly where God wants you to be. Now here's the challenge. What do you do with this desire? Do you just sit with it? Do you ignore it? Or do you act on it? Because desire alone is not enough. You have to pursue it. You have to pray for it. You have to study, learn, and ask God to reveal more to you. So here's what I want you to do. If this is resonating with you, if you feel that deep desire stirring in your heart, don't just keep it to yourself. Drop a comment below and say, Lord, increase my discernment. Let's stand together and pray for God to sharpen this gift in all of us. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, send this to them. Because discernment isn't just for you, it's meant to be shared to help others, to bring truth to those who need it. So don't wait. Step into it, lean into it, and watch how God moves in your life. Let's talk about something that sets people with discernment apart, an undeniable love for God's presence. This isn't just about going to church on Sundays or reading the Bible because you feel like you have to. No, this is something deeper. It's a craving, a longing, a hunger to be close to God. People with the gift of discernment are not satisfied with surface-level faith. They don't just want to know about God. They want to experience Him. They want to feel His presence, hear His voice, and be led by His Spirit in everything they do. It's like a magnet. They are constantly drawn toward places, people, and moments where God is moving. Think about Moses. In Exodus 33:15, he said, "If your presence does not go with us, do not send us up from here." Moses understood something most people don't. Without God's presence, nothing else matters. You can have success, power, and influence, but if God isn't in it, it's empty. That's exactly how people with discernment feel. They don't want to take a single step unless they know God is leading them. And look at David. He was called a man after God's own heart because he prioritized God's presence above everything else. Before he made decisions, before he fought battles, he sought the Lord. In Psalm 27:04, he says, "One thing I ask from the Lord, this only do I seek, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to gaze on the beauty of the Lord and to seek him in his temple. That is the heart of someone with discernment. Now, think about your own life. Have you ever been in a situation where you just knew you needed to step away and be with God? Maybe after a long day, instead of watching TV or scrolling through your phone, you felt this deep pull to just sit in his presence. Maybe you have walked into a church or a worship service and you felt something shift, like the atmosphere was different, like God was truly there. That is not just emotion, that is discernment in action. But here's what's interesting. This love for God's presence isn't just about feeling good, it actually shapes how you live. People with discernment don't just seek God in the big moments. They carry his presence with them everywhere they go. They walk into a room and something changes. They pray and things shift. Why? Because they are constantly connected to him. But let's be honest, this kind of closeness with God isn't always easy. It requires discipline. It means setting aside distractions. It means making space for him in your daily life. And sometimes it means letting go of things, even people, that pull you away from him. But the truth is, once you have truly experienced God's presence, nothing else satisfies. Nothing else compares. So, here's the question, do you love God's presence? Not just in church, not just when things are going well, but in your everyday life. Because if you do, if you crave his presence, if you long to be near him, that is a sign that you carry the gift of discernment. And trust me, that is a gift worth pursuing. When you truly love God's presence, it changes everything. It's not just something you experience at church or during worship. It becomes a part of who you are, shaping your thoughts, decisions, and even the way you interact with others. People with discernment don't just visit God's presence, they live in it. It's like a constant connection, a spiritual awareness that guides them throughout the day. When others react with fear, they remain at peace. When others are confused, they have clarity. Why? Because they are not operating on human wisdom. They are tuned into something much greater. Look at Daniel. He was living in Babylon, surrounded by idolatry and corruption, yet he never lost his connection with God. 3 times a day he prayed, seeking wisdom and strength. Even when a law was passed to stop him from praying, he didn't back down. Why? Because God's presence was more important to him than anything else. That is the mindset of someone with discernment. They know that no matter what is happening in the world, as long as they stay close to God, they are exactly where they need to be. And here's something else. People with discernment bring God's presence wherever they go. Have you ever met someone who just radiates peace, wisdom, and a sense of something greater? That is the presence of God at work in them. They don't have to announce it. People can feel it. But here's the challenge. Loving God's presence requires effort. It's not just about moments of inspiration. It's about discipline, commitment, and a willingness to make space for him in your daily life. That means setting aside time to pray, to worship, and to listen. It means being intentional about what you consume, who you spend time with, and what influences you allow into your life. Because the more you prioritize his presence, the sharper your discernment will become. So here's my challenge to you. Take a moment right now and ask yourself, do I truly love God's presence? Not just in the big moments, but in the quiet, everyday moments. Do I seek him when no one is watching? Do I long for him more than the temporary things of this world? If your answer is yes, then lean into it. Keep seeking him. Keep prioritizing his presence. And if your answer is, I want to, but I struggle, then start today. Take one step. Spend 5 extra minutes in prayer. Put on worship music while you drive. Open your Bible and read, not just to check off a box, but to hear from him. And if this is speaking to you, if you feel this pull toward discernment and a deeper connection with God, drop a comment below and say, Lord, draw me closer to you. Let's stand together and pursue his presence, because the closer we are to him, the clearer everything else becomes. The more you seek Him, the more He reveals. The more you surrender, the stronger your discernment grows. The more you seek Him, the more He reveals. The more you surrender, the stronger your discernment grows. The more you seek Him, the more He reveals. The more you surrender, the stronger your discernment grows. The more you seek Him, the more He reveals. The more you surrender, the stronger your discernment grows. Let's talk about something that people with discernment experience all the time: spiritual sensitivity. This isn't about being overly emotional or paranoid. It's about being tuned in, about picking up on things others miss. It's about walking into a place and feeling something shift, even if you can't explain it. It's about meeting someone and sensing something deeper than their words. It's about knowing, deep down, that there's more happening in the spiritual realm than most people realize. Some people brush this off. They say, oh, it's just a feeling, or you're overthinking it. But if you have the gift of discernment, you know better, because time and time again, those feelings turn out to be real. You sense something dark, and later you find out that the situation isn't safe. You feel peace in a certain place, and later you learn it was a place of prayer. This is not a coincidence. This is discernment at work. Look at David in the Bible. He was a warrior, but he never relied just on strategy. He had a deep sensitivity to God's leading. Before any battle, he would stop and ask God, should I go up against them? And sometimes God would say yes. Other times he would say no, or give specific instructions, like in 2 Samuel 5:24, where God tells David to wait until he hears the sound of marching in the tree. Why? Because that was a sign that God's army had gone before him. David felt that leading. He moved when God moved. That's discernment. Then there's Daniel. He was living in Babylon, a place full of idolatry, corruption, and spiritual darkness. But Daniel wasn't deceived. He could sense the difference between what was true and what was false. When he was told to eat the king's food, something in his spirit told him this isn't right. He refused, choosing instead to follow what he knew was from God. And what happened? God honored him, or it. Not only was he physically healthier than those who ate the king's food, but God gave him supernatural wisdom and understanding. Now think about Jesus. He walked in perfect discernment. He could look at a person and know exactly what was in their heart. When the Pharisees came to trap him with their words, he saw right through their hypocrisy. In Matthew 22:18 it says, "But Jesus, knowing their evil intent, said, 'You hypocrites, why are you trying to trap me?'" He wasn't fooled by appearances. He wasn't deceived by empty words. He discerned the truth instantly. So let me ask you, have you ever had a moment where you sensed something before you had any proof? Maybe you walked into a place and immediately felt uneasy, only to later find out that something bad had happened there. Maybe you've met someone, and even though they seemed friendly, something inside of you just knew they couldn't be trusted. And later you were proven right. This is not just gut instinct. This is spiritual sensitivity. This is discernment. It's God's way of protecting you, of leading you, of showing you what is really happening beneath the surface. And if you have this gift, it is something you need to pay attention to. Because the more you listen, the stronger it gets. And the stronger it gets, the more God can use you. So the question is, are you listening? Are you paying attention to what God is revealing? Because discernment isn't just about knowing, it's about acting. And if you have this kind of spiritual sensitivity, it means God is calling you to something greater. When you have spiritual sensitivity, it changes how you experience the world. You don't just walk into a place, you feel it. You don't just hear what people say, you sense what they truly mean. You pick up on things that others completely miss, and sometimes that can feel overwhelming. There's a reason why discernment is a gift and not a skill you develop on your own. It's a responsibility. Because when you sense things at a deeper level, it means you have to be more intentional about how you respond. Not everything you discern is meant to be spoken out loud. Sometimes God shows you something just so you can pray about it. Other times He reveals something so you can take action. The key is knowing the difference. Think about Jesus again. He could see right through people, but he didn't always call them out. Sometimes he waited. Sometimes he asked them questions to make them reveal their own motives. And sometimes he spoke directly. That's wisdom. That's discernment in action. But let's be real. Having this level of awareness can feel like a burden. There will be times when you wish you didn't know so much, when you wish you could just go along with what everyone else is doing and not feel this constant spiritual awareness. That's normal. Even Jeremiah, the prophet, struggled with this. He saw things others didn't, and at times it made him feel isolated. But here's the truth. God gives this gift because He trusts you with it. He knows you will handle it the right way. So how do you grow in discernment without feeling drained? Simple. Stay connected to God. Spend time in His presence. Read His Word and ask for wisdom. If you try to carry this gift on your own, it will feel heavy. But if you lean on God, He will give you the strength and clarity to use it the right way. And here's my challenge for you. If you recognize this gift in yourself, don't ignore it. Pay attention to what God is showing you. Start journaling your experiences. Write down the moments when you sense something and see how things unfold. The more you document, the more you will start to see patterns, and that will help you trust the gift even more. If this is resonating with you, I want you to take action right now. Drop a comment below and say, "Lord, sharpen my discernment." Let's stand together and ask God to increase this gift in all of us. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, share it with them, because discernment is not just for you, it's a gift that can protect and guide those around you. So step into it, own it, and let God use you in ways you never imagined. Discernment is powerful, but it is even stronger when paired with wisdom and obedience. Have you ever felt like you just don't fit in? Like no matter how hard you try, you always feel a little different from the people around you? Maybe you find yourself thinking deeply about things that others brush off. Maybe you see things in a way that people don't understand. If that sounds familiar, let me tell you something. You are not crazy, and you are not alone. This is a common experience for people who have the gift of discernment. People with discernment often feel set apart. They don't blend in easily, and there is a reason for that. When God gives you the ability to see beyond the surface, He is also setting you apart for a greater purpose. He doesn't want you to go along with the crowd. He wants you to stand firm in truth, and that is not always easy. Think about Joseph. He had dreams from God, visions of his future, but when he shared them with his brothers, instead of celebrating with him, they hated him for it. They were jealous, they misunderstood him, and they wanted him gone. So what did they do? They sold him into slavery, thinking that would be the end of his story. But God had a different plan. Joseph's journey wasn't easy. He went from being a favored son to being a slave, then to being falsely accused and thrown into prison. But through it all, he never lost his discernment. He never stopped interpreting dreams. And in the end, the very thing that made him different, the gift God had placed inside of him, was what brought him to a position of power in Egypt. The same brothers who had rejected him had to come to him for help. That's the thing about being set apart. It might feel lonely at times, but it is always for a reason. God doesn't call people to blend in. He calls them to stand out. Look at Daniel. He was taken from his home, forced to live in Babylon, and expected to conform to their ways, but he didn't. When everyone else ate the king's food, he refused. When everyone else bowed to the king's statue, he stood firm. When they told him he couldn't pray, he prayed anyway. He knew he was different, and he didn't fight it. He embraced it. And because of that, God used him in incredible ways. And then there's Jesus. If anyone knows what it feels like to be different, it's him. He walked among people, but he was not like them. He saw things no one else saw. He spoke truths that people didn't want to hear. And because of that, many rejected him. In John 15:19, he said, "If you belong to the world, it would love you as its own. As it is, you do not belong to the world, but I have chosen you out of the world. That is why the world hates you." So if you have ever felt like you don't quite fit in, take heart. It is not a mistake. It is not a flaw. It is a sign that God is doing something unique in your life. The question is, will you embrace it? Because when you do, when you stop trying to be like everyone else and start stepping into who God has called you to be, that's when He can use you in ways you never imagined. Feeling different is not easy. When you have discernment, you often see things that others do not. You sense what is really going on, even when people around you are blind to it. And because of that, you may find yourself feeling alone at times. But here is what you need to know. This is not rejection. It is a sign that God is setting you apart for something greater. Think about it. If Joseph had not been different, he never would have made it to the palace. If Daniel had blended in, he never would have seen the miracles God performed in his life. If Jesus had tried to be like everyone else, he never would have fulfilled his mission on earth. Being set apart is not a curse. It is a calling. And here is the truth. When you embrace your uniqueness, when you stop fighting to fit in and start walking boldly in the purpose God has for you, that is when everything changes. Instead of feeling like an outsider, you begin to realize that you are exactly where you are supposed to be. You start to see how God is using you in ways you never expected. But this requires faith. It requires trust. It means believing that even when you feel different, God has a reason for it. So here is my challenge to you. Stop seeing your uniqueness as a burden. Start seeing it as a gift. Instead of asking, why am I different? Start asking God, how do you want to use me? If this is resonating with you, I want you to take action today. Drop a comment below and say, Lord, help me embrace my calling. Let's stand together and pray for the confidence to walk in the purpose God has for us. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, share it with them. Because being set apart is not something to fear, it is something to embrace. And when you do, you will begin to see just how powerful God's plan for your life really is. God does not call those who want to fit in, He calls those who are willing to stand out. Let's talk about something that completely changes how you live: hearing God's voice. Now, I am not talking about an audible voice booming from the sky. Most of the time, God speaks in ways that are much more subtle. It could be a whisper in your spirit, a deep sense of knowing, or even a strong conviction that pushes you in a certain direction. People with discernment don't just hear, they perceive. They recognize when God is speaking, even when He is not saying much. Some people might think, does God really speak to us like that? The answer is absolutely yes. The Bible is full of examples of God speaking to people, but not always in the way you might expect. Take Samuel, for instance. As a child, he was lying in bed when he heard someone calling his name. He thought it was Eli the priest. But after running to him multiple times, Eli realized what was happening. God was calling Samuel, but Samuel did not recognize his voice at first. That is exactly how it is for many of us. God speaks, but if we are not tuned in, we might not recognize it. Eli had to teach Samuel how to respond. He told him, if he calls you again, say, "Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening." And when Samuel did, everything changed. He became a prophet who delivered God's messages to an entire nation. Now let's talk about Elijah. This is one of the best examples of how God speaks. Elijah was waiting to hear from God, and a powerful wind came, but God was not in the wind. Then an earthquake, but God was not in the earthquake. Then a fire, but God was not in the fire. And then finally a gentle whisper. And that was God. Why is this important? Because sometimes we expect God to speak in big, dramatic ways. We want a sign in the sky, a miracle, something obvious. But most of the time, He speaks in the stillness, in the quiet moments, in ways that require us to stop and listen. Think about Jesus. He didn't just listen to God occasionally, He made it a priority. Before making big decisions, He withdrew to pray. Before choosing His 12 disciples, He spent an entire night in prayer. In John 10:27, He said, "My sheep listen to my voice, I know them and they follow me." That verse is powerful. It tells us that hearing God's voice is not just for prophets or pastors, it is for everyone who follows him. But there is a key word in that verse: listen. It is one thing to hear something, but listening requires focus. It requires setting aside distractions and making time to be still. So here is the big question. Have you ever had a moment where you just knew God was speaking to you? Maybe it was an inner nudge telling you to reach out to someone. Maybe it was a verse that kept coming up over and over again, like God was making sure you did not miss it. Or maybe it was a strong feeling, a conviction so deep that you knew it was not just your own thoughts. God is always speaking. The real question is, are you listening? Because the more you tune in, the clearer his voice becomes. And when you recognize his voice, that is when your discernment reaches a whole new level. Hearing God's voice is one of the most valuable things you can experience. When you recognize his voice, it brings peace, clarity, and direction. It helps you make decisions with confidence because you are not just guessing. You are being guided by the one who knows everything. But let's be honest, sometimes it is hard to tell if it is really God speaking or just our own thoughts. That is why discernment is so important. The more time you spend with God, the more familiar his voice becomes. It is just like any relationship. The more you talk with someone, the easier it is to recognize their voice, even in a crowded room. That is how it works with God. The more time you spend in prayer, in worship, and in his word, the clearer his voice becomes. But here is the challenge. Hearing God's voice requires stillness, and in today's world that is not easy. We are surrounded by noise, social media, TV, constant notifications. Our minds are always occupied. If we are always distracted, how can we expect to hear a whisper from God? Jesus set the example for us. He often withdrew to quiet places to pray. Before making big decisions, before performing miracles, he spent time alone with the Father. He knew that clarity comes in the quiet, and the same is true for us. If we want to hear God, we have to make space for him to speak. So here is my challenge for you. Take time this week to be still. Set aside a few moments each day just to sit with God, without distractions. Open your Bible, pray, and then listen. You might be surprised at what he reveals to you. If this message is speaking to you, take action right now. Drop a comment below and say, "Lord, help me hear your voice." Let's pray together for clarity and wisdom. And if you know someone who is struggling to hear from God, share this with them. The more we learn to recognize his voice, the more we can walk in the purpose he has for us. The key to hearing God is not trying harder, but making room for him in your daily life. One of the biggest confirmations that you have the gift of discernment is when spiritual leaders recognize it in you. God does not give spiritual gifts in isolation. He places people in our lives, mentors, pastors, and wise counselors, who can see things in us that we might not even recognize in ourselves. When someone with spiritual authority tells you, "I see something different in you," or "You have a strong sense of discernment," pay attention. That is not random. That is confirmation. Think about Samuel. When he was young, he did not recognize God's voice right away. It took Eli the priest to help him understand what was happening. Eli told him, "If you hear the voice again, say, 'Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening.'" That one moment changed everything for Samuel. He went from being a boy who did not recognize God's voice to becoming one of the greatest prophets of Israel. The same thing happened with Timothy. Paul saw something in him. He did not just tell Timothy, "Hey, you are a good guy." He recognized a spiritual gift in him, and he encouraged Timothy to develop it. In 1 Timothy 4:14, Paul said, "Do not neglect your gift, which was given to you through prophecy, when the body of elders laid their hands on you." That is powerful. Timothy had a gift, but it was not just between him and God. It was something that was confirmed by spiritual leaders. Then there is Joseph. His gift of discernment was first rejected by his own family, but later it was recognized by Pharaoh, the most powerful leader in Egypt. Pharaoh saw something different in Joseph. He said, "Can we find anyone like this man, one in whom is the Spirit of God?" Joseph's ability to interpret dreams and discern the times led him from the prison to the palace, and it was not just his own belief in his gift that got him there, it was the recognition of others. This is why it is so important to stay connected to the body of Christ. If you try to operate in your gift alone, you might never see the full potential of what God has placed inside of you. But when spiritual leaders confirm it, encourage it, and help you develop it, that is when you start walking in your calling. So, let me ask you, has anyone ever pointed out that you have a strong sense of discernment? Has a pastor, mentor, or even a friend ever told you that you see things differently? If so, do not ignore that. That could be God using them to confirm what He has already placed inside of you. And if no one has said it yet, do not be discouraged. Stay faithful, keep growing, and in time the right people will recognize what God has placed in you, because when He calls you, He also confirms it. Sometimes the confirmation you seek is just waiting for the right moment. Stay faithful, and God will reveal it. Sometimes the confirmation you seek is just waiting for the right moment. Stay faithful, and God will reveal it. Having your spiritual gift confirmed by leaders is one of the most powerful experiences you can have. It is like receiving validation that what you have sensed all along is real. It brings confidence, direction, and assurance that God is calling you to something greater. But here is the thing. This confirmation does not always come immediately. Many people with the gift of discernment go through seasons where they wonder, is this really from God? Am I just imagining things? And that is exactly why spiritual leadership is important. God often uses mentors, pastors, and wise leaders to confirm His calling on your life. They see what God has placed inside you, sometimes before you even recognize it yourself. Think about Timothy. He was young, inexperienced, and probably uncertain about his role in ministry, but Paul, a strong spiritual leader, saw his potential. In 1 Timothy 4:14, Paul told him, "Do not neglect your gift which was given you through prophecy, when the body of elders laid their hands on you." In other words, Timothy's calling was not just something he felt, it was something confirmed by spiritual authority. Now, let's talk about Joseph. His journey was full of rejection. His own family did not recognize his gift. Instead of supporting him, they threw him into a pit and sold him into slavery. But even in prison, his gift made room for him. It was not his brothers who confirmed his calling. It was Pharaoh, the leader of an entire nation, who saw his wisdom and discernment and placed him in a position of great influence. So what does this mean for you? It means that even if the people closest to you do not see what God is doing in your life, that does not mean your gift is not real. Sometimes confirmation comes from unexpected places. But here is the challenge. While waiting for confirmation, do not stop developing your gift. Joseph kept interpreting dreams even when he was in prison. Timothy kept serving even before he was fully recognized as a leader. Your confirmation will come, but in the meantime, stay faithful. Now, here is my challenge to you. If you feel that God has given you the gift of discernment, do not keep it to yourself. Seek guidance from a wise mentor, pastor, or spiritual leader. Ask them to pray with you to help you develop and understand your gift. And if you are still waiting for that confirmation, do not be discouraged. Keep pressing in. Keep seeking God. The right people will recognize what He has placed inside you at the right time. If this message is resonating with you, take action today. Drop a comment below and say, "Lord, confirm your calling in my life." Let's stand together and pray for clarity, guidance, and confirmation. And if you know someone who is struggling with this, share it with them. Because the moment you embrace your gift and step into what God has called you to, everything changes. God's confirmation will come, but your responsibility is to keep growing in faith and obedience. God's confirmation will come, but your responsibility is to keep growing in faith and obedience. God's confirmation will come, but your responsibility is to keep growing in faith and obedience. One of the clearest signs that you have the gift of discernment is that you feel a deep sense of responsibility for spiritual truth. You do not just accept what you hear at face value. You test it. You weigh it. You ask, is this from God? And in today's world, that is more important than ever. There are so many voices out there, preachers, teachers, influencers, and even well-meaning friends who are spreading messages that sound good, but are they truly from God? That is where discernment comes in. The Bible makes it clear that we are supposed to test the spirits. 1 John 4:01 says, "Dear friends, do not believe every spirit, but test the spirits to see whether they are from God, because many false prophets have gone out into the world." That means not everything that sounds spiritual is true. Not everyone who speaks in God's name is actually representing Him. And people with discernment feel that deeply. They do not just blindly accept what they are told. They compare it to Scripture. They seek confirmation from God. They ask questions. Look at Paul. He warned the early church about false teachers constantly. In 2 Corinthians 11:14-15, he said, "Satan himself masquerades as an angel of light. It is not surprising, then, if his servants also masquerade as servants of righteousness." Think about that for a second. Not every deception looks like deception. Sometimes it looks good. It sounds right. But something is off. And if you have discernment, you can feel it. You may not even be able to explain why at first, but deep down, you know something does not line up with God's truth. Consider the Bereans in Acts 17, verse 11. They listened to Paul preach, but they did not just take his word for it. They examined the Scriptures every day to see if what he said was true. That is what people with discernment do. They do not reject things out of fear or skepticism, but they test everything against God's word. And then there is Jesus. He walked in perfect discernment. He saw through every lie, every manipulation, every false motive. The Pharisees tried to trap him with tricky questions, but he saw right through them. He never got caught up in religious games. He stayed focused on Ruth. That is what discernment does. It keeps you anchored in what is real, even when everything around you is full of confusion. So let me ask you, have you ever been in a situation where something seemed fine on the surface, but deep down you felt something was not right? Maybe it was a teaching you heard, a book you read, or even advice from someone you trust, and later you realized your instincts were right. That is discernment at work. It is a gift, but it is also a responsibility, because when you see the truth, you cannot just ignore it. You are called to stand for it, protect it, and help others see it too. That is why people with discernment often feel the weight of spiritual battles more than others. They are not just going along with the flow, they are paying attention. They are guarding their hearts, their minds, and the people around them. And while that can feel like a heavy burden at times, it is also an incredible calling, because in a world full of deception, God is raising up people who can see, who can discern, and who can help lead others to the truth. Discernment is not just a gift, it is a responsibility. If God has given you the ability to see truth when others are blinded by deception, He expects you to use it. And here's the thing. This gift is not meant for your benefit alone. It is meant to help those around you, to guide, to protect, and to reveal truth in a world that desperately needs it. Think about it. When Jesus spoke, He didn't just share wisdom for the sake of sounding wise. He spoke to transform lives. He called out hypocrisy not to judge, but to lead people toward true repentance. He warned His disciples about false teachers not to create fear, but to prepare them to stand strong. That is what discernment does. It sheds light on what is hidden so that people can walk in truth. Now let's bring this to your life. Have you ever had a moment when you sensed something was off but you didn't say anything? Maybe you felt a strong conviction to warn someone about a decision they were making, but you held back because you didn't want to seem judgmental. Maybe you saw deception at play but chose to stay silent because speaking up felt uncomfortable. If that's you, know this. Your discernment is not meant to stay hidden. When God reveals something to you, there is a reason. But here's the challenge. Using discernment requires boldness. It means stepping out in faith even when it is hard. It means being willing to speak the truth in love even when it is not what people want to hear. It means being obedient to God, even when others do not understand. That is not easy, but it is necessary. Look at Esther. She discerned that a great danger was coming to her people. She could have ignored it. She could have stayed silent to protect herself. But she didn't. She acted, and because of her courage, an entire nation was saved. That is the power of discernment when it is used the way God intends. So here's my challenge for you. Stop second-guessing what God is showing you. If He has given you discernment, He has also given you a purpose for it. Pay attention to the things He reveals to you. Pray for wisdom on how to act. And when the moment comes, do not hesitate. Step forward in faith. If this is resonating with you, take action right now. Drop a comment below and say, "Lord, help me use my discernment wisely." Let's stand together and pray for the courage to walk in obedience. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, share it with them, because discernment is not just about seeing truth, it is about acting on it. And when you do, God will use you in ways you never imagined. Discernment is a gift, but its true power is only seen when it is put into action. So here is the big moment. What does all of this mean for you? If you have recognized these signs in your life, then you are not just someone who notices things. You are someone God is equipping for something greater. Discernment is not just a skill, it is a calling. It is a gift that carries responsibility. And the real question is, are you ready to use it? This world is full of deception. Lies are everywhere, on the news, on social media, in conversations, and even in some churches. People are confused, lost, and searching for truth, but not everyone can see past the surface. That is why God gives discernment to certain people. He is calling you to be a light in the middle of all the darkness. He wants you to use this gift to protect, to guide, and to help others see clearly. But that requires courage. It requires stepping up and saying, "Lord, I am ready." Look at Esther. She was placed in the palace, not by accident, but for a purpose. Mordecai told her, "Who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this?" That is what I want you to think about right now. What if God has given you discernment because He needs you to use it right now? What if you have been placed in this generation, in this time, for a specific reason? So here is what I want you to do. Do not just let this be another video you watch and move on from. Take a moment. Ask God, what do you want me to do with this gift? Because when you start asking that question, that is when everything changes. That is when discernment moves from something you have to something you live. So, let's take a step back and look at everything we have talked about. If you recognize these signs in yourself, it is not by accident. God does not place discernment in people randomly. He gives it with purpose. He gives it because He knows you will use it. And let's be real, this gift is not always easy to carry. Sometimes it makes you feel different. Sometimes it makes you see things you wish you didn't. But here is the truth. God has given it to you because He trusts you with it. He knows that you will handle it wisely, that you will use it to protect, to guide, and to stand for truth when it matters most. Think about Nehemiah. He saw a problem that no one else was willing to address, the broken walls of Jerusalem, and instead of ignoring it, instead of pretending everything was fine, he stepped up, he prayed, he planned, and he acted. That is what discernment looks like in action. It is not just knowing, it is doing. So where do you go from here? You start by embracing the gift. You ask God, how do you want me to use this? You spend more time in His presence. You stay in His Word. You surround yourself with wise, godly people who will help you grow. And you trust that if God gave you this gift, He will also show you how to use it. This is not just about you. The world needs people who can see, who are not deceived by lies. Wand Ho can stand strong in truth. That is why God has placed discernment inside of you. The question is, will you use it? Because when you do, you will not just see things differently, you will live differently. And that is when everything changes. Now, here is where it all comes together. You have heard the signs, you have felt that pull inside of you, And if you are still here listening, it means something. This is not just another video. This is a moment of confirmation. God has been stirring something in you, and now it is time to respond. So here is what I want you to do. Take action. Do not just sit on this. Drop a comment below and say, Lord, sharpen my discernment. Let this be your declaration, your way of saying, God, I am ready for more. And do not keep this to yourself. If this message has spoken to you, then chances are someone you know needs to hear it too. Share it, send it to a friend, because discernment is not just a personal gift. It is something that can change lives, strengthen faith, and bring clarity to those who are searching for truth. So step into it, own it, and watch what God does next.